Good morning, Andy Lockwood, Lockwood College Consulting, and another episode of College Coffee Talk. So, hopefully, you're enjoying a nice hot brew. I was thinking about going Irish coffee today, but we're one day away from St. Patty's Day. And today, what I wanted to do, like I do every episode of College Coffee Talk, is go over some questions that have come in. Specifically, last night we did a webinar on how to find your financial aid and college admissions pot o' gold. And we got a bunch of questions both before the webinar and then throughout the actual webinar in chat. And a few people have emailed me to ask the questions that re-ask the questions that we didn't get a chance to cover last night. I think I did a pretty good job at answering those, but I know I did not do a good job at answering the questions that I had received prior to when people had registered, because we always ask, what's the one thing you want to make sure that we answer on the webinar? What's your burning question? So I'm going to go through a few of these. We have 23 or 24. I'm going to cover maybe 2 or 3, and maybe you'll have some of these questions. And if you have a question that I'm not answering, please pop it in comments. I've been getting a lot of great feedback about College Coffee Talk, so I want to thank you for that. Please keep it coming, and please, please, please not only like it, but comment just to so I can hear you and make sure I'm giving you the information that you want. And please share it. Post it on your wall or send it to someone that you think could use this information. Let's face it, there's a lot of misinformation out there in terms of what it really takes to get into college and qualify for scholarships and grants, and these questions are very similar to the ones that we typically get. And you get mailers from and notices and emails from your high school guidance department saying, hey, there's a college fair coming up, but they don't really necessarily tell you what to do on those college fairs, what questions to ask, who to speak to. And frankly, there's only a limited amount of value to going to those college fairs. I'll be making more comments on those later as we get closer to the one that's locally here in Long Island. So actually, there's going to be 2. It's college fair season coming up. So, all right, let's get into today's March Madness edition. I'm not going to share this because I think it's a big waste of time, but I fill out my bracket every year based on college financial aid generosity, and it works like a charm. If you define works like a charm as losing. So, yeah, actually this year I had Duke going all the way because they are not only a great basketball team, but they're also very, very generous. I also have Notre Dame going deep and a few other schools. The Ivies I always pick to go deep. Yeah. All right, let's get into the questions. Enough comedy jokes. All right, so first one I wanted to address is from Lisa, who said, what can you do if you've saved in the wrong place and found out right before you fill out the FAFSA? So that is a great question. I get that question asked in a variety of ways. So before I answer that, let me give a little bit of backstory. So the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, is the main college financial aid form that is required. Every college in the country requires it. There's also an additional form that she's not asking about, and so you have to check with each college what forms they require. But so I'm going to limit this answer to the FAFSA. What the FAFSA asks you about are all kinds of financial questions: income, savings, and then a whole bunch of other things. All in all, there may be 77-ish factors that the FAFSA draws out in terms of calculating your eligibility, which is otherwise known as your estimated family contribution. And I'm just speaking loosely here. The EFC is a number that the government, that the Department of Education, thinks that you can afford for 1 year of college. So, income, if you have someone graduating, let's say 2018, the income, this is not what the question's about, but the income that is required to go on the FAFSA is from 2 years ago. The Department of Education calls it prior. So if someone graduating 2018 will be filling out information based on the income taxes from an income from 2016. Now, Lisa's question is about savings. What if you find out you've saved in the wrong places and it's right before you fill out the FAFSA? Well, in that case, don't worry, it's different because income may be 2 years ago, but savings and assets are as of the date you file the FAFSA. I'll repeat that. The savings, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, 529s, etc., those have to be put down accurately, not from 2 years ago. No, accurate as of the date that you are filing the FAFSA. So what that implies is that you can make last-minute changes from a quote-unquote bad bucket. And just generally speaking, this is one of the things I talked about last night on my webinar. Generally speaking, money saved in your kid's name penalizes you far more severely than if it's saved in your own name. So you can make last-minute changes by shifting money from account to account, from a high penalty account to a lower penalty account, and there are also some exemptions entirely where money types of savings accounts don't penalize you at all. So you could shift your bad money, your bad buckets, into stuff that doesn't appear at all on your financial aid balance sheet, and it's completely legal and ethical. And it's kind of the same thing. The analogy I use frequently, it's kind of the same thing as if you have a senior citizen, parent or grandparent of a college-bound kid who's trying to qualify for more health benefits, Medicaid. So what they have to do is move money out of their names, and that's done through using trusts, and I think there's other types of tools that are used. There's a 5-year look back for Medicaid spending, spend downs, I guess is what it's called, Medicaid planning. So in financial aid planning, there's no look back. It's the same type of legal and ethical thing. We use different tools, but it's really the same type of thing, except it's probably a little bit easier to do for financial aid purposes. But either way, you're trying to improve your eligibility for benefits, and again, it's all in the up and up. Okay, so I hope I answered that question correctly. All right, and now Thomas, I'm choosing this question because this is apropos. It flows very smoothly from Lisa's question, and his question was, what's the difference in how the FAFSA and profile look at assets? So I mentioned before, there's two main forms, the FAFSA, and there's another form that many, not all schools by any means, require in addition to the FAFSA, called the CSS profile. Again, you need to check with each school that you're applying to which forms they require. The difference, by the way, between the two is that the FAFSA is about 108 questions, relatively straightforward, looking on its surface. Don't be fooled, though. You have to look at the directions very carefully, particularly about what to include, and equally important, what not to include. The profile is not straightforward on its face. It's about 200 or so questions. It's like a root canal without Novocaine. It is a rough form to do. I personally don't do either form. Pearl, my wife, does them in our practice because she likes stuff like that. I think that's weird, but she loves it. So one of the big differences is that the CSS profile includes more. It calculates your contribution by including more stuff, which means that it's harder to, you'll have a higher contribution, a higher estimated family contribution, usually under the CSS profile. I'm speaking generally, but remember, you want to have a low EFC. The lower your EFC, the more aid you can qualify for. So one of the key differences, the CSS profile looks at your primary residence and says that is an asset that can be used to pay for college, whereas on the FAFSA, that's one of the 4 exemptions. It does not count against you. So sometimes people mistakenly include that on the FAFSA, and they're shooting themselves in the foot. So that if you're doing a FAFSA, you should never include the value of your primary residence. I'm not saying that about investment properties or other real estate, just your primary residence. But the CSS profile is different. That's probably the main difference between, there's many others, but that's probably the main difference, because they look at your house as if, if you have $400,000 worth of equity, what the methodology is saying, in effect, is that we know that you are able to pull an equity line to help pay for college, so we're going to penalize you for that. We're just going to assume that's a resource that you have to pay for college. Now, just to make this seem a little less drastic, many colleges do not penalize you on all $400,000 in that example. Some schools who take the CSS profile will cap that at either $200,000, for example, or they'll take a number that's 1.5 times your annual salary. And there are very few schools, I think Harvard is one of them, that says we don't care about your home equity. So it's not completely across the board bad news if you're filing for a CSS profile for a school that takes that, but that is probably the main difference. Okay, the last question I'm going to address, and I think I actually talked about this last night, so just a repeat, I think it's good. Mimi asked, if I technically have enough money saved in an account specifically set up for my child's education in full, do I have any chance of qualifying for financial aid, or is the FAFSA a waste of my time? So the answer is possibly. I can't tell, but let's just use numbers here. I'll just work through the numbers because I think that'll help everyone understand. So let's say you have $200,000 saved for your kid's education, and let's assume that's enough money. two different things, right? So under the FAFSA methodology, let's say it's in your name as a parent. And I know the question that Mimi's asking is saved in, say, for college education. But let's say, for example, it's in the parent's name still. So what would the penalty on that would be 5% of that amount. So that would be, what would that be? I guess that would be $10,000. That's not too bad, right? Now, if that money were saved in a child's account, the penalty is either 20 or 25%. So it could be $50,000. So that supports what I was saying before. In other words, it's not necessarily how much you have saved, it's where you have it saved. But in either case, you might want to look at your chances or your the strategies of moving money around from a place where it penalizes you, either at that $10,000 or that $50,000 amount, into a bucket that doesn't count against you. And again, I covered these last night on my webinar. If you want more information about that, we will be running some more webinars, but there are 4.5 exemptions in the FAFSA that Pearl and I have identified that can possibly help families who have saved in the wrong place. Now, the rest of the story is income. Income is much more important of a factor. So if you have saved $200,000, chances are you have a pretty high income, and that may knock you out of the box in terms of qualifying, not so much the assets. So the perfect storm, so to speak, to qualify for need-based aid is to have a lower income on paper, relatively modest. We have a lot of self-employed clients who have a relatively low income on paper, and if they have a significant amount of assets, maybe that can be shifted, again, from a bad place to a good place. My final comment here is that if you don't qualify for need-based aid at all, which frankly most of our clients do not, don't despair. There's actually more merit-based money out there, and your kid does not have to be a Doogie Howser type of Mensa member who, built a small village on his service trip to some Latin American country last summer. There's plenty of merit-based money for regular kids, and merit is sort of a loose term that refers to anything that's not need-based aid. So there's all sorts of choices out there, and again, there's more of that than there is need-based money. So everyone can get funded for college. The average discount's 48.6%, and at any given college, roughly 75% of the families receive some kind of subsidy or some type of discount. Okay, so that was a three-fer right there. So I got to get back, complete my bracket, my losing bracket. Hopefully you're having a good day, good morning, and again, please share this, please comment. If you have any questions at all, pop them in there. And I appreciate it. We'll be back tomorrow for a special St. Paddy's Day edition of College Irish Coffee Talk. Thanks a lot for watching. Speak to you soon.